Hi, this is Principles of Management, and today's talk is on modern structural organizational theory. Now, modern structural organizational theorists came to the fore in the 1960s, but were firmly based on the works of Fayol, Taylor, and Weber, and their underlying tenets are very much the same. Operational efficiency remains the critical goal of any enterprise, but their theories have been tempered by neoclassical and human resources theory. Bowman and Deal in 1997 identified the basic assumptions of the structural perspective. 1. Organizations are rational institutions whose primary purpose is to accomplish established objectives through systems of defined rules and formal authority. 2. There is a best structure for any organization, something modified by the organization's objectives, its environment, the nature of its products or services, and the technology of its production processes. 3. Specialization and the division of labor increase the quality and quantity of production, particularly in highly skilled operations and professions. And 4. Most problems in an organization result from structural flaws and can be solved by changing its structure. The basis is in classical thinking, especially that of Fayol and Taylor, but the theorists of the modern structural school take this thinking a step further, in part because the business environment was increasingly becoming a global affair. The word differentiation begins to appear in management literature as a fine-tuning of the concept of stabilization. A large firm might, for example, participate in different markets, socio-political environments, be subject to different regulatory structures, technologies, and economies. In this environment, for example, questions of whether to centralize certain functions or to separate them geographically were assessed. So in this section, we consider the contributions of 5 of the most prominent structural theorists of the 1960s through the 1990s. At this point, schools of thought begin to specialize and overlap, and this series of theorists wrote at the same time that schools of thought on power and politics and organizational culture, among others, gained recognition. But those two are for later sessions. The structural organizational theorists we review here are Blau and Scott on the concept of the formal and informal organization, Walker and Lorsch on organizational choice, product versus function, Henry Mintzberg on the 5 basic parts of the organization, Elliott Jacques on why organizations are hierarchical, and we will end with Burton and Noble on technology as a contingency factor in the micro-design of organizations. Now, Peter Michael Blau was a sociologist. He was born in Vienna, Austria, and emigrated to the U.S. in 1939, and he earned his doctorate in Columbia in 1952. His sociological specialty was in organizational and social structures, and in particular, bureaucracy. He theorized explanations for many social phenomena, including upward mobility, occupational opportunity, heterogeneity, and how population structures can influence human behavior. William Richard Scott is an American sociologist who worked at Stanford University and specialized in institutional theory and organizational science. Now, in the words of Blau and Scott, and I quote, 2 basic aspects of social organizations are 1, the structure of social relations in the group or collectivity of people, and 2, the shared beliefs and orientations that unite members of the group and guide their conduct. They argued that social relations involve patterns of interaction and shapes people's sentiments toward each other, and further, that a social structure involves a system of shared beliefs and orientation which serve as a standard for human conduct. This is an argument that will be expanded upon by Edgar Schein that we're going to discuss in a later session. For Blau and Scott, the organization is a social structure, albeit fabricated, but it defines the immediate environment of people participating in it. As business organizations in the U.S. grew during the post-World War II era, They encountered structural issues that had not been present in earlier times. Companies began to expand internationally and to produce multiple products and services, both related and unrelated. Arthur Walker and Jay Lorsch tackled the question of whether it is better to organize by product or by function. That is, if a single firm manufactures both televisions and toasters, is it better to have one accounting department or two? Walker earned his doctorate in business administration at Harvard in 1964, while Lorsch was a professor of human relations there at the time. Their answer to the question was that it was anything other than a binary choice. It depends on factors such as whether the function is routine and repetitive versus problem-solving or creative, whether the goals of the organizational subdivisions are differentiated or focused, whether the respective time horizons were long or short-term, and whether their natural structures were more formal or informal. They proposed the use of cross-functional teams, coordinators, and proposed the concept of a matrix organization by overlaying both product and functional forms on a single structure. At the core of modern structuralism is Henry Mintzberg. Mintzberg earned his doctorate from the MIT Sloan School of Management in 1968 and taught at McGill University in Montreal. In 1979, Mintzberg argued that firms, no matter what the product or service they offered, had 5 common elements: top management, forming the strategic apex of the firm, a layer of middle management, an operating core which carried out the operations of the firm. These 3 elements form a direct hierarchical pyramid. 2 parts of each firm are necessary to it, but not part of the organizational and operational hierarchy. One is the technostructure, the analysts that design system and processes, and the other is comprised of support staff, legal, accounting, public relations, human resource, and other similar functions. This was an excellent assessment of the structure of firms at the time Mintzberg wrote, and while it may not be universally true, perhaps even a little dated, it continues to serve as a starting point for a firm's structural analysis. The hierarchical nature of firms has, to this point in management theory, simply been assumed to be an inescapable part of organizational design. Elliot Jacques, a Canadian psychoanalyst and organizational psychologist, studied group dynamics, and is most widely known for developing the concept of, quote, social systems as a defense against unconscious anxiety. That is, he studied the relationship between the purpose of the organization and unconscious or subconscious group dynamics, and how each can either aid or distort each other. As Jacques said, hierarchical structure has been the source of a great deal of trouble and inefficiency, and yet, after examining the alternatives, he concluded that a better model has not yet been improvised. He saw the managerial role as having 3 critical elements. 1, that every manager should not only be accountable for the work of his or her subordinates, but must add value to it. 2, that managers are accountable for sustaining a team of people capable of doing this work. And 3, every manager is accountable for setting a direction for his or her responsibilities and for motivating subordinates to follow willingly. In short, he felt that managers were accountable for 2 things, for work and for leadership. During the period since the 1960s, technology has played an increasingly important role in determining the capabilities of an organization. Burton and Ogle considered the impact of technology on an organization's design. The authors teach at the University of Aarhus, the School of Business in Denmark. The concern was that, in general, the introduction of modern technology into an organization should be accompanied by a set of rules on how it is to be used, or the result would be miscommunication and inefficiency. Specifically, a routine technology carries an assumption that its users should know what to do with it, and should have some procedural-based incentive to follow those rules. On the other hand, non-routine technologies have the opposite requirements. Okay, so in the next session, we are going to consider organizational economics and the use of power and politics within the firm. Good night.